Hello everybody, this is Megan, aka the Cow Lawyer, and today I wanted to bring you a video of me practicing side profiles. That being something I struggle with and I wanted to try to get better at. So in 2025, my main goal is to try to show more character differences, whether that's through the facial features, ethnicity, things like that. I want to diverge from a lot of my safe practices when it comes to what I like to draw, how I like to draw them, and I figured a great way to do that was to tackle something that I am notoriously bad at, that being side profiles. I can never get the nose to mouth chin ratio right. I look it up all the time, can't figure it out, and so little me decided it was just easier to never draw it. And you know what? That can only get you so far, and at some point you just gotta do it. 2025, this is the year, gonna get better at it. That being said, I will say Baldur's Gate unironically was something that really pushed me into wanting to do it, because I fell in love with a lot of the different facial structures of a lot of the characters, more of that like older look to them. Because another thing that I'm not great at, if you've seen any of my other past work, you'll know, wrinkles in aged characters. Like if they're not in a particular age range, more or less on the younger side, count me out. I struggle to add it. It looks like I took like baby face and then threw some wrinkle lines, smile lines. So what better way to fix that than to practice it? So what I decided to do, and you'll see it through these 3 pieces, is I took some profiles or side shots off of Pinterest and decided to try to capture those faces, mainly keeping the focus on the eyes, forehead, nose, and mouth, because I wanted to make sure that that was still proportional but also captured the original reference materials that I was working with and kind of show off the different faces. Another thing on top of that, I wanted to make sure that I included not just female, I wanted to include a male in there, just because I tend to draw females a lot more, and that is just something I need to like practice, is either side, drawing more masculine features, feminine features, just overall like the different age ranges. So that being said, great way to practice that, right? So I knew that at least one of these pose references or studies, I was gonna turn one of them into either an elf, a drow, some type of fantasy race that was with long ears. I'm always obsessed with drawing them just because I think it's fun. I love adding extra earrings to the ears, and especially if you have those like chains that tie to 1 or 2 pieces. I always find that very beautiful. However, in this case, I just kept it very simple with like 1 or 2 pieces for her in particular. I still wanted to keep the focus mainly on the face. I didn't want to go too crazy in either direction, just because overall they're still supposed to be studies. I'm not looking to do the most for like the outfits or anything else like that. I just wanted my main focus to be that side profile shape and the proportions within it. And so in this case, I made her a drow. Once I had the initial face structure down, I was just very like lightly drawing in some clothes, kind of going off of the original reference. I gave her like a turtleneck look. I would say it's almost akin to like robes, like maybe for like a wizard. In this case, I was initially thinking about adding some more filigree to the collar. I just ended up deciding that I didn't want to for this piece in particular. I wanted to keep it very simple, but just kind of see if I could draw your eye outwards. So I did overall simplicity on it and just keep it nice and simple, right? Alright, so for this 3rd piece, I wanted to do more of like a flatter face, where I wanted them to be very distinct, and I just really was drawn to like the nose and some of the face highlights on the reference. I thought it looked pretty stunning and wanted to see if I could capture that, and so I went in, did a quick guideline sketch to kind of get an idea of what I was working with, and then decided also that I wanted to show off a little bit more of the body, so I ended up drawing in the upper torso and doing more of like a bust shot. Overall, I do think it's okay. I kind of wish that I tweaked the hair a little bit more than I did. I tried to go off the original, but I didn't want to like commit to all the wispy bits, and I think I lost some of that motion in there. But I will say, for just a study reference, it isn't too bad. I also decided that I didn't want to keep it super plain, so I ended up adding a necklace to her as well, and then I gave her like these little 2 braids that come down from the top of her bob, because I wanted something to just like flow on top. But we're all just trying to make sure that the face looked good and just kind of refining a little bit here and there. I was ready to get them swapped over to their final papers. I wasn't too concerned about whether or not I was keeping everything centered, because I already knew that I was going to end up transferring them over, and I could make any adjustments later once I had them copied over onto my final watercolor paper. So that's what I got. Alright, now that we got the sketching done, it's time to transfer them over to our watercolor paper, and that way we can use the medium of inks. If anybody wants to know, the inks that I end up using for all 3 pieces are Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay Indian ink, Liquitex acrylic ink, and Rowney FW acrylic ink. The main reason I wanted to use inks over watercolor is I hate watercolor. I cannot deal with it. I am impatient, cannot stand it. I need things to dry, and then when they dry, I need them to stay. The reactivation of watercolor infuriates me to a level beyond belief. Love it for other people, fantastic if you can work with it. I do think you can create really amazing effects. Cannot handle it myself. Maybe I'll tackle that one day. It's just not today. That being said, do inks, because I know as I work I can water them down, get a similar effect that you can with watercolor, do very light washes, start building up my intensity, and then also knowing that when it's dry is good. However, the flip side to that being washes work better when dealing with these, just because I know that I have to work very quickly, because once they are dry it's permanent. So trying to avoid patchy areas, especially like on the faces where I can't disguise it a lot, it tends to be something that I focus on more than I should, but something that bugs me. So I find working in thin layers allows me to get a very thin coat of base tone done and then start building it up, and then also being able to drop in shadows without it being like a very harsh one, and I can slowly kind of get it to where I need it to be and not have to worry about the whole like once it's dry it's done. Still will take this over watercolor though, by far. Either way, the hair usually do like 1 or 2 passes before I start going back in with darker colors to add more texture, define the shadows, add a few different like tones in there, so that way it's not just all the one color, whether I'm adding a hint of purple, maybe a little bit more red here and there, just something to give it some variation. But usually I find like 1 or 2 passes with your base color tends to work well. I tend to water it down a little bit more. That being said, for this color palette, I wanted to do a little bit more warmer tones, green being like probably the cooler side of it, but it's more of a yellow green, getting some of that warmth back in there. Overall warm tones, so I picked kind of from one of these other outfits that I ended up putting him in, was more yellows, reds, and oranges, with green being almost like the back paneling color. So I wanted to incorporate that, try to pull off from that outfit when picking out the tones. For this one, I do think it ended up coming out really nicely. There are definitely things in hindsight that I would change, absolutely. I think like a smidge on the neck, I didn't quite capture the shadow right, so it makes it look like he's tilted in a way that he shouldn't be. But that is future me's problem for another project. That probably maybe drop down the shoulder down a little bit. Either way, for now, he's good. I'm happy with him. And I will say, as I was doing it, especially in this part with the oranges, my first coat was so like bright, it almost looks yellow. And I ended up having to go back in a few passes because I wanted to make sure that it read more orange, but it wasn't the same tone that I used for the stripes because I wanted there to at least be some contrast there. So I ended up having to do, I think, like 2 or 3 more passes with a little bit more red in there to kind of emphasize that a little bit more. And then for the paneling itself, I wanted to go with a darker color, but then I found it's like, I think it was going to draw your eye a little too much, so I ended up just doing a very light wash of the yellow, going back in with some more oranges and a little bit of red to kind of give it some more of a defined look to it. Then ended up saying maybe going a little bit more intense on the yellow. Overall, pretty simple. Didn't want the main focus to be on his outfit, so was trying to just do something a little bit simple in the shading, and then that way it was good. It was good to go. Now for doing the drow, I knew the oxidized purple tends to be really strong right out of the glass jar, and so I didn't want that sheen to be there, so I ended up going really light with it, making sure I got a very like even base tone down, and then if it was gonna end up slightly textured, I wanted it in very particular places, and so I would try to work in a blocking out, trying to get like the cheekbones and slowly build it up there, and then I could go back in, add some more like shading to it, but then also still go back over all of that with another wash to kind of even everything out. And so I was slowly able to build up the color to the intensity that I wanted, and I knew for her especially I wanted her color palette to be very simplistic, so I went with a lot of cool tones, a lot of purple, blues, and I only reserved the red for like a little bit of blushing here and there around the face, the eyes, and the ear for the ear blushing, and that's it. The rest of it I wanted to lean more cool so I could have that nice contrast between the eye and try to like draw your eye into it. And then for drows particularly, you tend to notice that their hair is usually a shade of white of some kind, and I didn't want the hair to be just the background paper because I wasn't sure if I was going to go back in and do anything to the background because I was still trying to keep it more as a profile reference. And so I ended up doing a very light wash of a purple, very subtle, but I didn't want it to be exactly the same as her like skin tone, so I like toned it a little bit, a little more into the gray, so that way I could just get a very light wash, slowly build up the colors that I wanted, and then help kind of differentiate that from the background, and then that way it could still be white but not like a stark white. I do think that ended up helping kind of pop her off a little bit. And then I was able to kind of go back in with more stronger shades to start adding into the shadows, and then just slowly building up the shadows to the where I wanted it to. I may or may not have gotten a little cross happy when doing the cross hatching. If I were to do it again, I would probably minimize that a bit with the hair, but overall I think it came out nice. Now for her jewelry, I did debate whether or not I wanted to do like a gold, silver, or any type of metallic. At the time I didn't have silver, so I ended up just doing like a very light wash of black, and then I had this white with gold specks in it and a very like light wash on that for the top, so that way it gave a little bit of a metallic look to it, but it wasn't in your face, so it kept it very simple. But I did acquire silver because not having one of the major metallics I feel like was on me for that. For her outfit entirely, I ended up doing almost like a wet on wet technique where I had the base fairly coated when I did my first layer, and then I went back in with a stronger one and kind of let it branch out to where I needed it so I can have almost like a soft shading, and then I would just go over once it was dry to add more tones in it and then start adding my shadows. I don't usually use that technique all too often. I do think I'll end up using it in the future because I think it added like a nice subtlety to it that I don't normally end up doing. And then for the clothes, I did keep it somewhat light, but then just went with a very pale gray and then slowly built it up from there, just so I can keep that overall color palette the same. Now for this piece, the only thing that I had going into rendering was that I wanted to pick up on the highlights and shadows of the reference photo I was using, and that was about it. the rest of it, I was more or less leaning into like, oh, it would be cool if I did like a mix up of like the purple and like this turquoise color. And I'm gonna say it wasn't as well thought out, but I just wanted to play around with it, and I wanted to ended up doing like this half hair split where I had like this magenta red, thrown that into the bottom, and then go back in with a turquoise. I do think part of this is a redemption from a piece that I tried to do. I was trying to draw fan art of Deku, and this is when I was like, oh, I could just use inks straight, not watering them down, and you definitely can. In my case, it ended up being too much, and it didn't look good. It wasn't even the right shade of green. It was a nightmare. And so I was like, oh, this was like a fun little thing for me to try to see if I could now get it to look good compared to the other piece. I ended up having the like magenta strands kind of tie into her twist tails because I didn't want that to only be magenta, but at the same time when working on her outfit I wanted there to be some contrast there, so I ended up doing like a little bit more intensity on the bottom to kind of get that separation there, and I was still missing a silver. I'm just gonna be honest, I didn't buy it until after I finished these pieces, so I ended up taking gold and then trying to add that. I initially tried to do the method that I did with the drow, where I did like a very light shading and then go back in with the gold, but it was just not working, and so I ended up mixing it in with another gold pigment that I had to create more of a lighter yellow gold, and then just have that be for the accent details in the necklace, and just did some simple shading. I do think I went a little bit overboard with some of the hatching, and I could have definitely toned that back a bit, but overall it was, for a study, all good. But I wanted to make sure that like there was dark spots, still doing very light washes, and then like slowly build up the colors that I wanted, because when you lay down the color it tends to be really dark in comparison, and it kind of works in the same fashion of markers where you put them on dark but you know it's going to dry a little bit lighter. So I usually have a swatch off to the side to kind of give me an idea of what these colors are going to look like once they dry, and then that way I can kind of better plan for it. And you can kind of see where I noticed that it was a little bit too light. I had to go back in and edit that. So as this video comes to an end and we take a look at a few glamour shots, the biggest burning question I have for you guys is, what would you like to see from me next? I plan on doing a little bit more like fantasy medieval stuff, but I'm always open to suggestion, and I look forward to seeing your comments below. But other than that, you guys have a lovely day. Feel free to give a like or subscribe, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.